And welcome to all of those here tonight, and those who will be watching the videos in the weeks ahead. And I'm so grateful for those that are checking into the videos and the feedback that you're giving. Just it's wonderful to see the feedback that you're providing when you reach out to me directly through both email, text, and seeing a couple comments here and there. I would ask you, however, because there are a number that are actually reaching directly to me. If you're going to reach to me, could you consider doing the like, subscribe, and comment on the website, because it kind of helps move things up into a place where more people see it. So that would be a great help. But again, it's wonderful to hear your feedback, wonderful to hear how blessed you were in these weeks past. And I want to continue tonight in that same vein. So if we could just open our hearts into the living presence of God within you. I trust in God's holy protection over you during our time, that you will hear and recognize the words that God wishes you to embrace, and that you are protected and released from any words that are not to be received within you. So I want to begin by asking a simple question that you could kind of meditate on for a moment, but it expands into the process of sharing a pretty powerful story that I've experienced. I would ask that, what if you are one decision of obedience away from a witnessing and participating in the miraculous? And I don't mean obedience to a demanding overlord or a rule-giving entity that religiosity has defined and confined God to being. But I'm talking about obedience to that knowing within, and a sense that you are to move and do something. And recognizing that that's coming from a loving God, providing an occasional gentle nudge in guidance to say, move with me. And it would bless you to obey this gentle nudge and allow yourself to enter the grace that God is extending, which would move you by grace to be in alignment with God's Spirit and witness the glory that's about to unfold. You could look at this like a loving expression that God is extending God's self in a moment for you to participate in the wonder and miraculous, and this act of obedience to know God more deeply. He's using it to help you recognize, as God may heal somebody, it helps you to be increased in that simple act of obedience. And I have a beautiful experience that works with that. I had served an individual for many years down in Rhode Island. I won't name the specific spot because there's a number of people that I've served in that region. But this individual was suffering with ALS, and I was down there like every couple of weeks. And it was pretty intense, going in there every couple of weeks, driving down, doing the 4.5-hour drive, spending some time with him, whether it was 1 day or 4 days or 2 days or whatever it happened to be, then returning back home. And then 2 weeks later, going back down. And I did that for about 2 years. But there was this Sunday morning, I didn't even know it was Sunday. I honestly, I had lost track of time. I had this sense that I was to go out. Now, the gentleman was asleep. The caregivers were there. And I was like, I was to go out. I didn't have a specific direction. I just knew that I was to go out, get in the car. I obeyed. I got in the car, I backed up, and I started driving down the street. And I felt this grace within me to obey. And I got to the end of the road and I turned right. And I drove down and I turned left. And then I turned right onto the main drag. And as I got down, I came to an intersection. And I turned right. And as I did, there was a parking lot on my right. And I went to pull into it and I realized it was a church parking lot. So I walk into this. I'm going to skip a lot of the preemptive stuff and save some time here. But I walked in, and it was in a Catholic church, and there were individuals there filling up for a church service. And again, I'm just coming out of the fog, realizing that it's now Sunday and people are coming in for Sunday service. And I just kind of placed myself in one of the central aisles in a pew, and I look over, and there's a wonderful family to my right, and there's a priest on the altar, and the service begins, and there's a number of things milling about. All through the service, I kept getting a divine awareness that I was to bless his daughters to my right. And I kept looking over, and this was a gorgeous family, two beautiful young daughters, and they were probably in their like early 20s or late teens. And then a mom and what looked obviously to be a boyfriend, but not, he wasn't really part of the group, but he was still in the pew with them. And I kept thinking in my head of the world instead of being in obeyance, obeying completely. I was looking over thinking, they'd be offended if I walked over at the right time. So I'll wait. And then I kept putting it off. And at the end of the service, as you've may heard me say in the past, it was interesting to watch because if anybody's been in a Catholic church, everybody receives communion, and then what happens is, boom, people are hitting the door. The minute they receive the Eucharist, bang, they're going out the side doors, they're going out all over the place. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking down at the floor and I'm thinking, if God wants me to do something, he'll keep them here. But it's a young family, they're probably going to blow out of here. And I look over and they're still there and they're obviously prayerful. So I was like still looking over thinking, well, the daughters, I, as a guy, single guy, walking directly toward them on the same pew that I'm on, I was thinking, this could be threatening to them. God, do you really want me to do this? And I kept arguing in my head. So finally, at a moment when everything was cleared and the priest finished his sermon, and he had given a sermon about his recovery over that couple weeks from a car accident. And there were a number of people that were still staying up front. And then what I could see was a number of Christian charismatics in a group, and then an individual that was sitting up front. And I eventually found that out, that, as they were in prayer and they were speaking in tongues from within the church, that was a beautiful sight to see. And finally, I gave up on my little argument in my brain and I obeyed. But I stepped forward to the pew right in front of me and I walked across the front of that family. And I'm thinking, well, if God really wants to, he'll move something, he'll do it. And I walked out the pew, turned right, and honestly, I was in a little argument in my mind. I'm not going to bother them. They don't want to be bothered. And as I'm turning to walk right by them and out the back of the church, the mom just stands up and finds herself standing in front of me going, and like looking at me going, you could see on her face, like, why did I just do that? And I just looked at her, and as I did, God blessed me to speak and say that I have a message for your daughters and specifically for this one. And the mom started crying and was like, oh my God, we've been praying for an answer. Well, I ended up giving them a very private message, and it was very specific directly to the young girl who was in a situation where she was being taken advantage of and on the verge of being harmed sexually, and there were a bunch of different things that were presented. It shifted this family in a remarkable way, and they were embracing. Beautiful things happened, and I'm in awe. So I'm kind of like extracting myself from the situation, kind of letting them embrace God, receive the prayer, receive the blessing, and the boyfriend had stepped to the pew behind, and he was just sitting there waiting for this whole thing he didn't understand to calm down. However, I get up and I walk away just to get out of the scene, to let God's presence minister to them, and I'm starting towards the front door. As I did, I met the priest, but this woman came over, and she came walking up to me, and she said, you're here to pray over people, aren't you? And I was like, well, I was kind of taken aback. Turns out that she was the lead of the charismatic group. Well, the priest finishes all his hellos and goodbyes and all that stuff, and he starts walking up the front aisle. And she says, you need to come with me. And she walks me up front, and we go by the priest, and the priest is kind of chatting with a couple of people as we're going up. As I get to the front pew, there's a young woman. She was probably close to 30, late 20s, somewhere in there, sitting with what I didn't know at the moment was her mom and dad. But the woman had also been in a car accident and had severe brain damage. And she didn't know that these were her parents. She just thought they were caregivers that would take her to church. And God blessed me to reach and say, would you receive prayer? Well, all the charismatics in the group kind of came over and sat behind the girl. And as I rested my hands on her head, again, out of obedience, all of a sudden the girl's eyes opened up and she looked at me, and then she looked over and then just started crying, Mom, and realized that was her mom, started crying, looked over and saw her dad, and was just like awake in that moment. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Through out of obedience, not having any clue of what was going to transpire here, he blesses this family, and now I'm standing in front of this woman, and it turns out that she had this. Her parents now explained to me that she had a major brain trauma. She had been dealing with it for about 3 months, had no recall of memory, and also had a problem maintaining even short-term memory. So like if they were going to church, they might have to remind her 6 or 8 times that they're here to help her, they're bringing her to church. Let's go to church. Let's go. They'd have to keep reminding her. Now she was fully clear and remembering. Well, if you remember, I was also I'd mentioned that the priest had done a sermon, and during that sermon he had shared that previous week he had had a major car accident and he was just recovering from it. And now he starts walking up, and he comes up and he sees what's transpiring in the prayers over there, and the woman, the charismatic leader, said, Father, would you be willing to receive prayer? And he said, well, yes, I'd be happy to. And the fascinating thing about this was really early in my awakening stage, is I'm kind of looking at this, well, why does the priest want me to pray over him? And I went over, and he was now in the next, like off the center aisle, that other side of the pews. And I was blessed to just pray over him, rest my hands on his head. And as we're praying, I'm in prayer. The priest looks at me and goes, wow, I actually feel something. Like this priest in the role of service in the priesthood had never in his experience, if I remember correctly, he was a priest for close to 30 years, had never in his experience felt the presence of God within a process of prayer. And he felt something change within him. And he's just like sitting there and he's talking and going on. And then all of a sudden he looks to his left. So I'm like reaching over the front wall section of the pews. And I had just finished praying over him. And he looks to his left, and down at the end of the pew now, because he was on that side and looked at, Dad! Well, it turned, he had also shared during the sermon his lack of connection with his family and hadn't seen his dad for years. His dad is now standing at the end of the pew. His dad comes forward, this priest calling his dad, Dad. His dad is like, you've never called me Dad before, and they stand up and embraced. I'm standing back like in awe of this whole thing, like, wow, this is amazing. But I also felt like I was to draw away, because the priest and his dad and then the surrounding people there, they were all like wrapped up and celebrating in God's glory. And I walked out in wonder. And as I'm going out into the parking lot, that younger family I told you about pulls up beside me and is just so thankful. They lowered their windows and were so thankful and felt great peace. And the girl was in the back seat, now clear, not crying in tears anymore, and just said, thank you. I thank you for pointing out what you did. I needed to hear that. So they drive off. I go get in my car and drive home. But if I had not been obedient to that loving, gentle nudge of God saying, come with me, join me, witness that you might be edified in the nature of my glory, I would not have been blessed to experience that. And I'm trying to help you recognize that there is a beautiful expression of life available to you just beyond that moment of obedience. And if we choose to be obedient to this gentle nudge dwelling in us through holy intuition, we will witness beautiful things far beyond our own power and influence. And I want to ask that you might take a deep breath. Trust and know that the living presence of God has established a holy residence within you. The very breath that you breathe rises from the true and perfect author of all things blessed of creation. As we breathe deep, remember that God has formed a perfect union from his spirit unto yours, makes available to you her perfect wisdom, strength, and sustaining grace. For God, as our creator, created all that is within creation that is of a blessed nature. We join and align ourselves with the blessings of God's presence and choose the living attributes of God within our interactions upon this earth and the decisions we make upon our journey. We breathe deep, surrendering into holy obedience to the loving and gentle nudge within us to move us into participating with God and to be used as holy instruments to evidence divine glory so that others might remember glory within themselves. Because the beautiful thing about that story that I shared in Rhode Island was, in every aspect of all that I was blessed to witness, that each of those people that were touched felt and knew the presence of God within them, and that allowed them to share in the glory of God and be reminded that, yes, the earth presents them challenge, but God is ever present. So we breathe deep. Abun sala alchul mule chete miru tatalimen. Azrai inachiditu shnekili andurukumu. We breathe upon the life-giving breath that is God within, O breathing life, that is Abun, the sustaining breath that connects us as one to our living Creator, our Provider, our Sustainer, our Completer. In Yahweh Elohim, Yeshua, Abun Sala Achulem Tutariuma, be freed from the words of man that have limited the limitless nature of our God, that you might discover the fullness of God's presence within you and discover pure guiding intuition to witness the miraculous in your day. Amen.